Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Thanks for tuning in. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. It's Sunday morning. This is my post-fight review of Oleksandr Usyk versus Mairis Briedis, the first of the World Boxing Super Series semi-finals that took place last night. Let me start by saying it was an excellent fight, and this is exactly the reason why we support this World Boxing Super Series. The consensus number 1 and number 2 squaring off against each other in a semi-final, being given the motivation and incentive to take the fight by the framework, the publicity and the financials that the tournament provides. And here's what you get: top-class fights, competitive fights, and this is exactly what this fight represented last night. I've had a trawl through my Facebook and Twitter this morning before recording this video, and I can see that the fight and the result of the fight has caused some controversy. You have people believing Briedis won the fight. You have people believing Usyk won the fight wide. That's probably an indication that the fight was very, very competitive, that there's such a disagreement as to the scores involved. The fight started well. Mairis Briedis really impressed me in the early rounds. I thought he was building pressure nicely. I thought he was cutting down the ring nicely. I thought he was landing telling bodywork nicely, and I thought he was countering Usyk very nicely. Very, very possible to score Briedis several of the early rounds in succession, actually. You know, a lot of people I've spoken to had Briedis winning the first 2, for example, and that's not something that I would disagree with at any extent. I thought Usyk looked kind of uncomfortable in the early round or 2. It wasn't the normal, confident, flowing work that I associate with him. I thought Briedis made him look uncomfortable, and I thought that pattern continued for the first half of the fight, actually. I didn't think it was the normal Usyk that we see in there, and I think a lot of the credit for that has to go to Mairis Briedis for, you know, applying such pressure, landing good bodywork and countering. I actually think, I don't think Usyk was ever close to going down, or, you know, I don't think he was ever hurt in a serious way, but I thought he was caught heavily several times by telling punches from Mairis Briedis, and I do think those shots had an effect on him. And maybe he was buzzed ever so slightly on several occasions in those early rounds. After an uncomfortable start, where Mairis Briedis, for me, did take a lead, I thought Usyk came into the fight strongly towards the middle and second half of the fight. I thought Briedis started to tire and started to slow, and I thought Usyk came on strong and showed exceptional fitness throughout the rest of the fight. His work rate throughout the course of the fight was extremely strong. You know, he was throwing a lot of punches, and in the second half of the fight, there was too many occasions for me where we saw Briedis with his back against the ropes and Usyk putting far more punches in against a smaller man with his back to the ropes. Usyk's straight punches, the jab, were weapons throughout the fight. I've mentioned the size difference already. I thought the size difference in this fight was very, very telling. I thought Usyk looked substantially the bigger man compared to Briedis. And I think the visual impact of that bigger man, you know, coming forward, having the smaller man up against the ropes and having the bigger man throwing higher output would possibly have been very telling in the judges' eyes. I also think towards the second half of the fight, Usyk appeared to be the bigger, stronger puncher in there. I appreciate that Briedis may have had Usyk buzzed a few times in the fight, but I felt a little bit of the snap went out of Briedis' work, and I felt he was a slightly less threatening puncher in the second half of the fight. There were moments, but as a sort of general rule, that was my take on it. Whereas I thought Usyk was coming on very, very strong, putting a high output both in terms of quantity and quality, and was beginning to land possibly the more telling shots, certainly in the second half of the fight. You know, that was my take on it. I thought Usyk found his groove more in the second half of the fight. I thought we saw better movement, better timing, and I thought he was starting to get his straight punches going, and he capitalised on the fact that Briedis, for my money, slightly weakened. I had it as a very, very close fight, but I did have Usyk winning, and I can make no bones about that. Look, I didn't score the fight with a pen and paper. I can't read it out to you that I had round 4 to Usyk or round 4 to Briedis. I didn't score it in that nature. But what I would say is that I was left with the definitive impression that Usyk had won at least 7 rounds of the fight. And I would say that I couldn't disagree with the judges' scorecards of 115, 113. I appreciate there's people out there, people who know a lot about boxing, who've gone the other way in the fight. And I can see, I can see some rationale behind their thinking. But for me, after a difficult start, Usyk picked up the majority of the middle rounds. I scored those rounds maybe from like rounds 5 through to rounds 10, 11. I scored that largely to Oleksandr Usyk. I thought he was the stronger fighter in that period, the higher output fighter in that period, and I actually thought he'd started to bridge the gap in terms of quality and maybe even overtaken during that period. So credit goes to both guys, and credit goes to Mairis Briedis. He emerges with a huge amount of credit from that fight. I think you can still make a strong argument that he's definite number 2 in the cruiserweight division, and it's hard to say after that loss that it's hard to say that there shouldn't be a rematch. Perhaps maybe there's still a debate as to who's the number 1 in the division. I think Briedis is a danger man out there, and certainly a lot of interesting fights will be available to Briedis on conclusion of this tournament. I mean, whether he wants to go up to heavyweight or not, I'm dubious of that, because I thought he looked so small at cruiserweight next to Oleksandr Usyk. But yeah, certainly if the loser of Dorticos Gassiev, you'd want to see them against Briedis. The loser of the final, if that's Usyk, or the winner of Gassiev, Dorticos, you'd want to see them against Briedis. Although you kind of wonder if this was the peak of Briedis. He was 33 years old. This, you would assume, was his peak earning potential in the World Boxing Super Series. And you wonder if there will be the financial incentive for him to take on those kind of fights after the opportunity of the World Boxing Super Series disappears. So you wonder if this could be a turning point in the career of Mairis Briedis. But I would say he's given Usyk the toughest fight of his career. He's emerged with immense credit, showed a huge amount of heart, durability and toughness, and he's created an open question as to the result of the fight. So, fair play to Briedis. Usyk, the air of invincibility has gone after this fight. Usyk's a very, very good fighter, but we possibly saw last night that he isn't unbeatable. I do think in winning this fight, and as I've mentioned in the video, I do think he deserved to win this fight. I think Usyk stakes a solid claim to be included in the pound-for-pound top 10. I really do. If you look at the nature of his form, the guys he's starting to beat, I think that was only the 13th or 14th fight in his career. He's already beaten several big names in the division. He beat Krzysztof Glowacki when he was arguably the number 1 consensus cruiserweight out there. I know Glowacki's an unfashionable name now, but at the time I think there was a strong argument that he was the number 1 cruiserweight in the division. He's beaten Mairis Briedis, he's beaten Marco Huck. I think he's building a resume that means he's at least in that conversation of the top 10 pound for pound, certainly in the top 15 for me. But he did look, he looked beatable for the first time really last night, and some of the success that Briedis was having has actually made me wonder whether Murat Gassiev could cause Usyk a hell of a lot of problems. I'm not saying I'd necessarily pick Gassiev to beat Usyk. I think Gassiev's very, very good. But the more I think about it, the more I think it's very likely Gassiev will beat Dorticos. I appreciate that's a 50-50 fight. It's a fight that I've changed opinions on several times. I need to watch a few more tapes before doing a final video and final prediction. But I'm now starting to think Gassiev will beat Dorticos for reasons we'll discuss in a separate video. And assuming the final is Gassiev-Usyk, which it could well be, I think that's a tough fight for Usyk. I think the educated pressure that Gassiev brings, almost Golovkin-like, obviously they share the same trainer and that sort of thing, but the way he stalks opponents, the way he closes down the ring, the way he can put the punches into the body, the power, the size, I think he may prove even more of a test for Usyk than Mairis Briedis did. And let me tell you, if that fight starts with Usyk as some sort of overwhelming favourite, 1-5, 1-6, 1-7, I think he was even higher than that in this fight, 1-10 in places. If it starts in that fight, you'd be inclined to have a look at Murat Gassiev causing an upset there. But maybe with this show of that he has some chinks in his armour, maybe you won't be getting prices like that anymore. I don't know. A lot of talk has been on Usyk moving up to heavyweight after he cleans out this tournament. Whether he does clean out the tournament is still a big question. I have always on this channel, and long-time viewers will know this, I've always been very sceptical about Usyk at heavyweight. I have referred on several occasions to the fact that I believe his power has been overstated because he scored a 100% KO ratio against lesser opponents at the start of his career. I think we've started to see that whilst he's clearly a heavy-handed guy, his power isn't as devastating as people first thought. He didn't drop or look like dropping Mairis Briedis for my money last night. And how that will transition against guys who are 20, 30, 40, hell, maybe 50, 60, 70 pounds bigger than him, is a real open question. I also believe with Usyk's skill set, he's better off boxing from range. He likes to move, he likes to keep it long. It's going to be a lot harder for him to do that and to use that sort of box and move and jab and cross style when he's up against guys who are much bigger than him. At 6'3", Usyk's a big guy, but he'll look short compared to the likes of a Tyson or Hughie Fury or a Deontay Wilder or a Joshua or any one of a number of other guys you call out. Whether he'll be able to implement his style with the same effectiveness against guys who are so much naturally longer and rangier is another open question. The other factor you have to consider is if Usyk is at all susceptible to pressure. We'll probably get a better test of that in the Gassiev fight, but for me, he was uncomfortable when Briedis was walking him down and closing down the ring and stopping his movement. If he's uncomfortable to that level of pressure against a guy like Briedis or against a guy like Gassiev, if that turns out to be the case, how comfortable will he be when he's got a guy like Big Baby Miller walking him down? Now, I appreciate he'll have a substantial speed advantage over Baby Miller, so people will think maybe he'll be able to keep distance a lot easier than he would do against Gassiev. But just imagine if that was a heavyweight in there, landing some of those counters and some of that bodywork on Usyk that he had to eat at the hands of Briedis last night. I think it's an open question. Usyk's a good fighter, he's classy. Look, I wouldn't pick a guy like Manuel Charr to beat him, and Manuel Charr holds the Versnella world title. Briedis even knocked out Manuel Charr. I think Usyk could go out there and school Manuel Charr, to be frank. But would I be giving Usyk too much of a chance against the consensus top 3 or 4 heavyweights in the world? Funnily enough, stylistically, I actually think Parker matches up better for him, because I know Parker's a big guy, but he's a shorter guy. And he's a guy who's at his absolute best when he's jabbing from distance as well. And Usyk may beat him to the jab. But against naturally bigger guys like Wilder and Joshua, who are delivering those shots from so far across the ring, I think it's a real question. Anyway, there we go, guys. There's my thoughts. I think Usyk, deserved winner in a very close fight. I think both guys deserve immense credit. Usyk, I do believe he was a deserved winner, and I think he's cemented himself as the number 1 cruiserweight in the world and created a case to be considered in the pound-for-pound top 10 by doing so. Briedis, for making a guy who many thought was invincible look very, very, very beatable, and for winning multiple rounds off the top guy in his division. Both guys deserve credit. The Boxing Super Series deserves credit for putting on such an excellent fight that it turned out to be. Let's hope the other 3 semi-finals are just as good as this one in both weight classes. And interesting to see how it all plays out. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your take on Usyk Gassiev, Usyk at heavyweight. How did you score this fight? Leave them in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, please hit subscribe and please hit the thumbs up button. Many thanks for tuning in.